For research institutions in the humanities and social sciences in Japan, it is difficult to maintain and operate data archives on a long-term basis. Therefore, the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science launched the program in 2018 with a 5-year timeframe. Today, I will introduce 3 main activities. In 2021, this program launched JDCAT. Over 13,000 metadata from 5 institutions have been harvested and can be cross-searched. The program created schema derived from schemata of JP Core and DTI. The program developed an online data analysis system. It allows users to create and run R and Python programs to analyze data retrieved from JDCAT without installing statistical software or downloading data under an environment of a customized Jupyter notebook. Analysis programs and results can be published and shared. The system is expected to be used for collaborative research and education. The program published A Guide to Data Sharing in the Humanities and Social Sciences in 2021. The purpose of the guide is to help advance research in fields of the HSS. The guide covers standards for metadata and formatting, data management plan, data preservation, and data confidentiality. Through these activities, this program aims to promote the development of the humanities and social sciences community and the long-term preservation and reuse of data. Future challenges for the program are to collaborate with data archives internationally and to develop human resources with expertise and skills in the long-term preservation and utilization of data. Thank you for your attention.
Data visualizations require digital preservation professionals to challenge a core assumption. The data and information workflows will automatically produce static objects that can represent a complete record of our times. How do we do fixity in a world where increasingly nothing is fixed? Here I use Tableau as an example. Tableau data visualizations begin with data sources from files, servers, or saved data sources. In Tableau Prep, the data is filtered, added to, renamed, split, grouped, or removed as necessary. Finally, visualizations are created with a drag and drop GUI. These visualizations are revolutionizing how organizations understand, produce, and use information. As the data is updated, so the visualization responds in real time. When it comes time to transfer these information assets to a repository for long-term preservation, we are confronted with the fact that there is no automatically generated fixed digital object that contains all of the information and data present at each step of the workflow. The process of documentation must therefore be active. We must determine a preservation object amongst all of these options by understanding the goal of the visualization and how it was used in context. If a single view of the visualization was used to evidence a situation, a TIFF of that single view might suffice as the record. But if the visualization was used in its entirety live during an event, it might be necessary to try to preserve the functionality. A software cannot predict which data and information need to be maintained, for how long, or for what purpose. Defining this is a people and process problem as much as it is a technical one. The content that is required to maintain accountability, transparency, and justice will not necessarily be created without active intervention. This is where we need collaboration with data and information management professionals. Thank you for checking out my poster.
This poster explores the landscape of software, tools, and methods in web archive research. It is based on a survey conducted by members of WalkNet, an interdisciplinary network for the study of web domains and events. The survey asked individuals from a library, archive, and web archive environment and from a scholarly, academic, IT, or web design environment about the methods and tools they use for data collection and analysis. Their responses show that both groups actively collect data from the web using various crawl software and services as well as custom scripts. The choice of tools is influenced by changes in web technologies and specific research questions and methodologies. Among both groups, we see a broad range of methods of analysis. They include manual and computer-assisted forms of analysis, as well as qualitative and quantitative analyses. It is further notable that many of the tools mentioned are not specific to web archive data. Respondents from a library, archive, or web archive environment seem to be especially concerned with making web archive data searchable. Tools for digital forensics and preservation are also mentioned by members of this group only. Respondents from a scholarly, academic, IT, or web design environment, on the other hand, mention more tools for qualitative data analysis. The fact that tools from the digital humanities and social sciences are taken up by both groups of respondents points to an ongoing exchange between the different groups. By taking a high-level look at differences and commonalities between communities that participate in web archive research, our poster provides a starting point for an in-depth analysis of individual tools and methods. Based on the needs and expertise of different communities, targeted training in skills, tools, and methods for web archive research can be developed.
Hi, I'm Yiting Lin. I'm a first-year student at the University of Glasgow, so please bear with me.
Sorry.
So this poster is considered participating in a geopark as a way to engage with local communities to create participatory archives. Geopark is a protected area that a museum can cooperate with local communities to preserve the local cultural and natural heritage by developing a sustainable socio-economic system for the area. So this sounds promising, but I'm curious about its potential challenges in digital preservation. This research detected the challenges and mapped them with the digital curation lifecycle model to illustrate how controversies developed in current practice. I'm doing a case study on the Gold Museum in Taiwan. This museum has been participating in Geopark to engage with local communities since 2020. The current practice and the related legal framework have indicated some controversies through the digital curation lifecycle, as shown on the poster. This is here is a take-home message. In transformation stage, it might be critical for the Gold Museum to reassess who the designated community is. This assessment might also help the Gold Museum as a public museum to balance the conflicting demand from the communities and government oversight bodies for the museum. I will continue to find out the possibility with my doctoral thesis. I hope this case study from Taiwan can highlight the potential opportunities and the threats and propose a solution to improve the social sustainability of digital archives. Thank you for your listening. I forgot to start my video. Is there anyone else want to present their poster?
I think that might be all of us. Check our. Are there any questions while we just double check that we don't have anyone else?
I'm just checking the program. I believe there are 2 additional posters, but I don't know if anyone would present that. If not, I would suggest if there's any questions.
I have one reading about the museum digital preservation. So in a past life, I worked at a museum where we developed an app, like it was like History Pin, if you're familiar with it, where you drop your geotag and you get to see historical images in real time. And I'm quite sure that like we developed it from, we didn't wrote our own code. I'm pretty sure that app is now completely, it doesn't work at all. It would be quite old now. But as a small sort of grassroots initiative, we wouldn't have had any funding for preservation. Like it was just get the app out there, and that was the goal. So have you had anything about that come up in your research about whether preservation would be scoped as part of a project like that in a museum?
Yeah. So about the lifespan of the digital service, that's my main concern too. So I'm trying to, although I'm not a technical expert, but I'm trying to help the museum to create a more sustainable digital service, and especially on the community engagement part, so that although the digital service is died, but they can continue to remain and maintain the source of the data and the knowledge that conveyed on the app or other digital service. So that's my main concern.
Yeah, it's challenging. It's really interesting research. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Oh, hi, Fabi.
Oh, hello, Angela. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the posters. I'm just opening my camera. It's nice to start some conversations in online sessions. Sometimes people a bit shy behind the screens, the camera. So I try to get involved. Angela, you mentioned history ping. Fun enough, my colleague who is the web officer, he sent me a link about our resources being used in history ping is too. So it might be worth checking again because I think it's going on. I thought it was actually defuncted as well. You know, it's been going on for a while, but it might be working and all set up. And I think it might be worth checking. I think attracts a certain type of audience, people of certain age or people with just very history-minded kind of background, academic history background, but it's worth pursuing. I have a question to Theo. Theo, I have heard you talking to Matthew and Matthew talking about Archer project. Can you explain? I missed your presentation with him. Can you explain your involvement in the project and Archivum? Is that you guys were in the beginning? What is the partnership there, and how? Yes, I think that's the question.
Okay, it's not a partnership. We are competing companies. The Archiver project was within the European Union funding, is what is called commercial procurement. So you have several activities where different companies on different consortiums present a solution to a common problem. In this case, is research data coming from several institutions.
Yes.
It goes through different phases. So the first one, what I call the phase 0, is a market consultation, and several companies and several actors several players in the field, digital preservation, and some companies that presented solutions only for the storage without any of the common background related to digital preservation, presented some solutions. The original consortium, which is the bias group, CERN, DESI from Germany, EMBEL from the UK, and PIC from Spain, will select, based on their data sets, will select some competing solutions. This goes through 3 phases, and in the very end, it's only Archivum on one side, Matthew, as you mentioned, and LibNova on the other side. So we built a solution for tackling this type of research data management. Not only the organization, the structuring, but also some powerful searching capabilities and all that. So it can be used for future reference or future research, like comparing some results. For instance, just let me give you an example from astrophysics. The observations from the telescope and radio telescopes in several parts of the world will undergo several interactions, and you can see the different movements of stars, galaxies, and all that. So all of this generates enormous amounts of data, specific file formats that should be kept, handled, managed in a specific way. That is the end result. In the case of Linova, this has generated one specific line of product, which is called LabDrive. We're going to update all that information. And this is actively being commercialized and being used by some institutions. Just to give you two names, Oxford University is using LabDrive for organizing not only the research, but not only the research, the specific research data, but also the surrounding administrative things that sometimes, it takes a lot of time. And also the University of New Mexico in the States are beginning to use this. We are in the deployment phase for this, so they are the initial ones. And this is also of use for private companies. Pharmaceutical sector is particularly interested in getting all this material organized. I hope I give you a better understanding of the whole thing. It's a bit complex. Helena, you raise your hand.
Yeah, I was just wondering, can everybody tweet their posters afterwards? Because I'm not able to install the app, so I can't see, look, I'd like to look back on people's posters. They were all great presentations. So I'd like to look back at them in more detail after the conference. And I'll be tweeting out my poster as well on the iPres hashtag. But it'd be great to see people's posters again, to be able to read everything on the text. But they were all great presentations.
Angela, I have a question for you. I find it interesting. You said something about, oh, maybe it was Elena. I'm so sorry. I think I mixed up. Sorry. About the web, about giving access to. In fact, it might be a question to all of you. It's kind of what is coming next. So, we've digitized, we made things available in a more passive way. And I think the next thing is about making data available, make a corpus of things available where the end user is exploring that, is text mining or checking the data or visualizing the data or cherry picking, and that's for you as well, Theo, as as a provider, as the user internally sometimes, but externally as well, the wider public, to be able to play with and use the data, use the things in a more active way. And how that can be sustainable in the sense that, people are still trying to organize things and digitize rather, and giving access in that way, allowing people to reuse the material in a more creative way. It requires powerful tools. How can you keep this up?
Do you want to go first, Theo, or will I?
Yeah, I go first, and then I pass it on to you. Well, the content, the owner of the content is in the case of our experience, is the institution that generates or manages that material. We only provide the technology for extending that use to the overall community. But in that respect, you also hit some issues with the IPR. because especially when you're generating, I don't know, drug research and all that material is also highly confidential. So it's not really public knowledge until it gets to a certain point. For some other things, public funded research projects, there's at least within the European Union, there's an obligation to make that available for the community of researchers. So you can run analytics on that, or extend the actual research to some extent. But from our perspective as commercial providers, we are just providing the technology for the community.
So I'll just tie in then. For our poster, we're just specifically looking at web archives, and it's part of a larger study of the challenges and the skills and stuff needed to work with web archives. And it looks at people at different stages in their career as well. So researchers and also information professionals, so curators and technologists and stuff. And so there's lots of different challenges to then getting to the data. So that's the wider report is going to be published in the next couple of days. And so one of the big barriers for access, you even get to the content before you start doing any of those analysis with those tools, is legal deposit for a lot of collecting organizations as well as a barrier. So I work at the UK Web Archive based at the British Library, and under non-print legal deposit regulations, which is what we collect under, you're not allowed to do any big data analysis on the legal deposit content. So we do have other derived data sets that you can do a big data analysis on, but you can't do it on any of the current legal deposit content because of the regulations. And that's the same. Different countries have different regulations. Some are quite similar. In Denmark, for example, you can do that analysis, but you have to be registered with a university and then have special access and work within their own special environment. So there's lots of different barriers for that in the first place. But another point then is then also for some content that is openly available that you can do data analysis, it's just so big. It's much bigger than other digital collections as well that that you can work on. So size is a big issue, and then the tools that you need to be developed to work on those tools. So that's on things like the Archives Unleashed project that are working on tools to do some analysis. But you know, the way that web is published is changing all the time. So then the way that you've collected has to change, and there's always going to be one step behind. The technology is always going to be one step of what's being published, because a lot of it's proprietary. So it's very difficult to understand how they're publishing. So there's lots of different challenges. So that's just, you know, one small element. So the report goes into a lot of details of what people have been working with web archives for more than 10 years to more recently as well, and some of the challenges that they're facing with that. And then hopefully then we can start looking at, you know, ways of coming together to try and resolve some of those challenges to make it a little bit easier. But yeah, there's no easy answer to that one for web archives anyway.
We're not there yet.
No, so do keep an eye out on the WorkNet hashtag and Twitter account as well for that. And the UK Web Archive will be tweeting about it as well. That report's coming out in the next couple of days.
Ooh, that's exciting. Keep it up for it.
We had a preview.
Yeah, exactly. Get the
with VIP.
It's exciting. Yeah, I think for us, I actually work in a data and information management shop right now. So I think I am the client that Teo speaks about. My job is to keep data information, to get that to people when they need it, where they need it, to make sure it's accessible. We haven't transferred. It's not about at this particular point with data visualizations, it's on the horizon, that needing to be able to transfer that to a repository for long-term preservation. But right now it's very much about keeping those visualizations viable for clients who created them. We're at that point because they're so fragile with connecting to data sources. If that connection is broken, then the visualizations don't render, and that's our particular information management challenge, because those interactive things are used to inform all sorts of things. So it's it's a multifaceted sort of challenge for us. And right now we're just at that very basic, can we keep them for 5 years? And do we need to? That's the other thing. Since we're an information management shop, we're not going into it knowing that everything needs to be kept forever. It's very likely, like I build visualizations in my work to report on, how did I do in my information management? And those are not something that you would need to keep for any length of time. Like you need them for your briefing and then that's it. You don't need to keep them longer than that. Well, a retention period. I shouldn't say this at 4:30 in the morning as an information manager saying, oh, you don't need to keep it. That's terrible. But there's a set time that's a lot shorter than the time we think about in digital preservation, right? So if it's only needs to be kept for 5 years, you wouldn't need to do the kind of work that the others are speaking about to keep that safe for that length of time. So I hope that makes sense, Fabi.
Yeah, it does. Just a follow-up note that is a misconception. The archivist, the information manager, keeps everything, and that is not the case. And when we say out loud and we write blogs that are like, well, we are throwing away this and that is that is some criticism. And people do come back to us saying, are you crazy? You were doing this and you're doing that. And it's like, yes, but that's what we do. We don't keep everything. That's why we manage this stuff well, or not.
I used to work on a reappraisal team in an archive, and it was our job to go through what was already there and make sure it should all be there. And it was very interesting to see, like, oh, maybe that shouldn't be here, just on a second look. So it's really an important archival process that I don't think we talk about enough, of making sure we've got the right stuff.
It is, and in the context of digital preservation, only goes to a repository what really needs to be kept, or kept to a certain period of time, as you were saying. And that is the challenge sometimes in the communication that has to happen in our organizations. There are certain things we have in our care that serves a purpose for a period of time, and then we don't need to keep. Imagine keeping things for 50 years. How much money in storage you would pay for the whole of that? For some of us, this is an investment of thousands of pounds in the UK currency. So yeah, it's this thing about managing retention as well as long-term preservation, perpetuity, whatever that means. We need to have those conversations internally sometimes. At the moment, I'm struggling with my digital preservation because we made some mistakes. I'm trying to delete things from the repository, and it just doesn't delete because there's a retention. And I was like, oh my God, if it's maybe it's a bug in the system or something like that. But we put things in the digital preservation to keep, not to be deleting. But then we realized we made a mistake. You just don't wanna. You need to rework on the data set, the file set. In my case, is digital objects. But anyways, I'm just talking out loud here.
Yeah, I just going back to retention and all that. That's something that is technologically possible, but it's a matter of management. It's a matter of organization. So it depends on the policies of the institution or the country or things like that. We know that, for instance, in the UK, because we have several customers requesting it, for some kind of documentation, the current legislation makes it compulsory for the institutions to keep for 75 years. I guess this is more analog than digital, and it should be adapted. And then you have, Fabi, you just mentioned about the storage cost. Of course, you have solutions, and there will be solutions that are cheaper than just hot storage or cold storage, long-term tape or something like that. Future technologies we don't know, but that's more about the organization and the planning, rather than a technological issue. It's more about the policies and
yeah.
What you just said. I don't need to keep forever and ever some things, but how this is going to be of use 5 years, 10 years, things like that. And then you just can put it somewhere else. But I mean, this is all digital preservation.
Yeah, I think digital preservation falls into digital collections, digital data, digital objects, whatever you want to call and what's most appropriate for organizations. Management. I think digital preservation cannot be looked in silo. It needs to be part of a collection management framework, umbrella. And I think, you know, a lot of people are getting there, but there was a point of digital preservation was the focus, in particular, how people would do digital preservation. I think for many years that was, we're trying to get there. But I think the conversation for a few years now moved from the governance of the digital holdings, and that makes more sense and open up for this sort of planning and, you know, and even in planning digitization now, you digitize things for access. In our case, we digitize things for access. So what is the need to have uncompressed files kept for perpetuity in the system? I found this it doesn't fit well with cost benefit, but that is an example.
You just used the magical word, governance.
The G word I heard once.
Yeah. I was there when it was invented.
Did you invent it? You can say that. We would believe
no,
it.
No. But I mean, this comes from the sailing world in the 200 years ago. When you talk about big sailboats, you have the captain, the skipper, and you mentioned the metaphor was governance. So that's the way of handling the ship, where you want to go, or how you want to go. This is just the perfect metaphor for what almost everything in life. And as I said, policies, regulations, everything comes under this umbrella of governance. The technology is just there to make it possible, and to make it possible in a simplified way. If it's adding complexity, is of no help. So this governance, this planning, this management is what it's at really at the bottom level of everything.
I think sometimes it's like, there's a tendency to be like, well, we'll find a technology to essentially create governance, and it's like that. It doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. For part of the challenge too is just the sheer volume of information and data to be managed. So sort of that like knee-jerk, well, there's got to be a piece of technology that will help me find what I need to keep, right? And so it's flipping that conversation that we figure that out and then we apply the technology. I think that's a constant challenge. And in web archiving too, Helena, I actually come from the web archiving program in Canada, Library and Archives Canada's program. I worked with them for quite a long time, and they have such a good governance framework around that work. Like I, as a operational web archivist, I never questioned what I was supposed to be collecting. Like I knew, and I always speak so highly of that program because all of those policies were in place. Like here's what you collect and how you collect it, and here's how we're going to do all of these things. And then it was applying the technology. That was the dream team. I will always speak highly of that team.
Yeah, because just talking about, you're talking about I can't even say the word, long term, because we collect under legal deposit, we have to collect for the, future generations. We have to make it available in perpetuity. I'm not going to say the word because that's the legal mandate. We have to do it. So it's a challenge. So that's why we really need good governance structures and stuff like that to make sure we're adhering to the regulations and that we're fulfilling that mandate. Because it's the same in your program as well, Angela. That's under legal deposit as well, isn't it?
It's collected under its own authority within the LAC Act, but it is more like akin to legal deposit than it is to an archival activity, because LAC is interesting, right? It's a library and an archive, and it's the two institutions came together and now kind of share a mandate. So it's an interesting place to work because you kind of dabble in both of these things. Yeah, but it's the same assumption, right? That you keep it forever, that it goes to the archive and it's kept forever. Unless you're on the team reappraisal, which is a whole different team. But that's never come up actually that I know of for web archiving. Like, when would there be a point where a legal deposit governance would have you look at what you've already collected and review it? And how challenging would that be when everything is in ARC files? Like,
we do get sometimes notice and takedowns, so requests, and so some things do get taken down. If they are published and they're illegal, they will be taken down. And then also if there's been some data leak where some sensitive information has been published accidentally, then they get reviewed and then that information gets removed, but never deleted unless there's actual cause for it, that it doesn't fit under the regulations. So it just could be suppressed. So it just really depends on what the situation is and then what the legal regulations are around that.
that makes sense, yeah.
I have a question, because none of what you're saying makes any sense to me, because I'm a computer scientist and so I don't deal with any of that stuff. But when you have tangible things to archive, you don't keep them forever, do you? I mean, isn't there there was never a thought that you have to keep everything forever, surely?
Ooh.
It depends on the institution, I think. Like, I've worked in institutions where that's definitely the assumption when they bring, like, things are acquired, that you will keep it forever. But coming from Canada, we're such a young country, so we've only got a very short time period where forever is since 1867. So when we're collecting and thinking of our national archive, that's just the lens we come from. Like, yeah, we're going to keep it forever. I don't know if different perspectives around the world.
I don't know. I mean, I worked in London for a while, and I remember one summer when everybody went on holidays, I was sent into the Church of England archive. I worked for the Church Commissioners, and they said, toss out everything from before Queen Anne. And so that was my job for the summer, chucking out everything that was before Queen Anne.
That's a bold move.
Yeah.
I mean, I work from a young university as well. London School of Economics is about 125 years, in fact. We celebrated a couple of years ago. So things we produce or things we collect are very current and modern, maybe 100 years old maximum, and that are older things. But I think just to respond what was the question was, do we keep things for eternity? Well, if there wasn't people thinking like that, the Magna Carta, for example, wouldn't have been kept. Or there are certain things that needs to be kept, I think, for perpetuity. But and so each archive, each areas, they will define within their remits what needs to be kept, what's really important. And but that's why I was saying, Denise, we have to make these decisions. We can't collect absolute everything and think that we're gonna keep them forever. That is a tunnel, is a funnel activity sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes we collect more stuff, and then over a period of time, people start deciding, well, actually we don't need this, or actually don't need that. But I think historically, there was a period where collecting everything was the norm. And then actively collecting and appraising and creating collections policies start kicking, because people will start running out of space or out, and now out of storage, or the data becoming too big. It's unmanageable. But yeah, I think I can say that there are some institutions out there that will keep certain things for a very long period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's my point. I mean, you don't collect things and just label everything as we need to keep this forever. I mean, it's like you say, governance is the key. It's got to be reviewed, and at some stage you look at the worth of what things are, whether they're tangible or intangible. I mean, and really, as a computer scientist, I can with confidence say, whatever your technical problem is, that can be overcome. I mean, if we created a technical problem, we could solve it. But it's really the governance. It's how you want to go about it. It's what you want to streamline. It's what you want to reduce the manual contribution to it and automate it and things like this. And those processes have nothing to do with your governance of the digital object.
As I said before, sorry, as I said before, it's not only a technology issue. It's not. It's about legislation. It's about policies. So that's what conforms the overall governance. I know because I work with some industries, banking, for instance. You have to keep, depends on the country, but more or less the civilized world use the same kind of legislation for that, and you have to keep everything for a number of years. Then you can dispose of that in whatever way. But and I remember in the old days paperwork and all that, and this must be kept somewhere in a warehouse for until the moment that is no longer of any use. So it's not really a technology, it's more about that overall governance, just policies and keep on those policies.
Andrew,
I would say that when you talk about keeping everything forever, I mean, you have to talk about which organisations. I mean, if you look at an archive like NARA or TNA or even Public Record Office Victoria, where I come from, the assumption is everything we get in is kept forever. We may change our mind at some point, but that's uncommon. And yes, it's acknowledged that the collection accumulates over time. But that's the archive itself. If you take a step back and look at the agencies that feed the archive, there are policies and practices there that tell you how long the agencies need to keep stuff for. And a very small percentage of it ends up in an archive. The traditional figure has been about 5%. And if you have more than, so 95% of stuff is thrown away. And typical retention periods are 7 years, because that's to do with how long you can take in Australia. It's how long you can take legal action for. After 7 years, you can't take legal action on many things. And so the records relating to financial matters and stuff can be thrown away because you can't, there's no point in them anymore. Other things need to be kept for 95 or 100 years. Typically, they're personal stuff related to people, and particularly people who've been in the care of government. So it really depends on who you're talking about in terms of the retention periods. Archives keep everything forever, or keep everything that they accession, they keep forever. Usually an archive has the job of deciding how long retention periods are for agencies. And of course, then there's laws and stuff if you're talking about banks and private organizations. And I'm also a computer scientist, by the way.
Andrew, you just mentioned two different things which are relevant. One is keeping, archiving for whatever period of time. The other one is accessing, and also the permissions and the restrictions. And this applies, as you mentioned, some clear examples. So one thing is just keeping, and I'm thinking about all archives for 100 years content, things like that, and accessing that. So it's two different things, and we as providers, technology providers, we should handle that in the best possible way.
I'm not sure that that's the distinction's that useful, because essentially the view is that an archive, or any form of archive, or any sort of agency, any form of digital preservation, is keeping stuff for as long as they're needed for access. There's no point in keeping stuff that are no longer necessary to access. So the technology is basically about how long is this required by your stakeholders, basically. And the thing to remember about stakeholders is they're not just you. So if you're in an agency, for example, and you're looking at your records on your things, the things that you create and doing your day-to-day work, you're a stakeholder. You have some decision about how long you need to keep it for. But there's lots of other stakeholders involved. If you're an organization, for example, there are governance bodies like auditors and managers and even the police. They all have an interest in the work you're doing, and the retention periods are basically set around how long you need to keep, how long all of those stakeholders need to keep that information for. And it may be, you can destroy it as soon as you finish using it, or it may be that you actually have to keep it for 100 years, or it may be that you have to keep it forever. Depends on the stakeholders and what it is. And a lot of what an archive does is, in fact, actually sit down and work out, go through all the possible information that you can generate, and actually decide on how long you have to keep things for, and that's about how long you need to have access to them. Does that make any sense?
It does. Yeah, I find the interesting challenge of retention and sorting and that sort of thing now working in information and data management. Another part of it is that in increasingly complex systems environments, I might have in one system data that, 5 different retention periods or policies might apply to it, but it's all within the same system. The structure might not make it particularly simple to take each piece apart and to know what I need to do with each piece. And I see that as like a huge part of the governance challenge moving forward for these environments, and making sure that they're built to support those policies and that governance. Yeah, same thing we were saying before, it's figuring that out and then implementing the correct technology. But yeah,
The funny thing about that is that I don't know how much experience you've had of paper records and 19th century records and that sort of stuff, but you look at 19th century records and they have exactly the same problem. You look the way that the records management systems at the time often didn't do a good job of being able to separate out the types of records in terms of retention. So if you look at an archive and you look at a collection or a series, I'm thinking of one in particular, it has all sorts of stuff in it, most of which you would never keep for more than 5 or 10 years. Some of it you'd throw away immediately. But because the paper-based record keeping system wasn't actually good enough, it didn't get it. You just had to keep a lot. Yeah. And the funny thing about it is sometimes the stuff that they should have thrown away is actually the most interesting from a personal point of view.
Usually.
It's actually
Yeah.
it actually captures some of the stuff that you know, like the what it was like to work for such an organization,
Yeah.
which is not necessarily what it was kept for, but it's actually there. So this is not a new, what I'm trying to say is this is not a new problem. I agree with you that you should build a system that separates it out cleanly and makes it easy to dispose of things properly. But, you know, it's not a new problem.
I think the interesting challenge that I come to in differentiating the two a little bit is the cost of keeping that stuff that shouldn't be kept because we can't separate it out. I think it's getting more difficult to justify, especially if things are exploding into terabytes of content, and the preservation needs to be much more active than having our boxes in storage. How do I tell, you know, how do I brief up that, like, well, because we can't separate it out, we have to keep it. It's a real like governance resource expenditure issue that I think is perhaps just a little more stressful in the digital environment. I don't know if you found it that way. I find it that way.
I can see where you're coming from. Again, I go back to the paper, and I look at the cost of paper. And the really interesting bit is if you look at agencies, and because agencies have to keep records for periods of time that are after their use, and you look at the amount of money they're spending on storage costs of paper, because it's actually cheaper for them to store it, even so, than to go through and do a proper disposal regime on it. And then sometimes you get to agencies and you suddenly discover that it's actually would have been cheaper for them to dispose of it than to pay for the storage costs, because the storage costs are going through the roof. But because they've got so much of it, they can't actually dispose of it properly, and they've got themselves into a trap. So in a sense, again, I appreciate, I think that you're right, that, you know, there's so much data. You could easily generate huge amounts of digital data, and you have to keep it for a length of time. But it's, again, not necessarily a problem that's actually different. It's actually, you look around at the paper records that agencies still have, and they have exactly the same problem, and it's a huge cost. And I don't know how to solve it, to be honest. We try and encourage it, and they get trapped, and they can't. It's too expensive to dispose of, and it's too expensive to keep, and they get stuck.
The only time I've seen that handled exceptionally well as a project was a reappraisal team, but it was, I think, 10, 13 people dedicated to a project for a number of years to actually put in all of the work that was necessary to get that collection down to what it needed to be. They were brilliant, but it's like, that resourcing is not something that's going to exist frequently.
Yeah, and most archives, when they accession stuff, will actually go through and they don't normally dispose of it. They actually take the bits that they want and then send the rest back, and they say, you deal with this. And of course, I'm sure that it gets thrown in the skip.
That never happens, Andrew. No.
Well, but I mean, you know, to be fair, I mean, what's happened is that it's been sitting in a store somewhere for 50 years, and it's gone to the archives. The archives have taken what they want, is what they think is permanent, and it goes back to them, and they say, well, what's the point of keeping anything more? I should let other people talk too.
Yeah. It's an interesting comparison to web archiving, where you're selecting what you want. I find that like a totally different acquisition activity.
We don't have any of the issues you're talking about because we keep everything. And then also, because we're collecting for the future generations, we don't know what they're going to be interested in. So we don't have any, the only criteria we follow is that it fits in with non-print legal deposit regulations for the UK Web Archive. So I always like to highlight some of the other collections we have, because we have got lots of time series collections on general elections, you know, big political issues, public figures dying, but we also have collections on online enthusiasts, which some of the websites include Carpets of Witherspoons or Pylon of the Month. and things like that, because you know, you don't know what people are going to be interested in, and this is where you can actually record ordinary people's experiences of life, which is often missing from the written record, because collections, you know, people's hobbies and stuff weren't generally recorded in the physical archives so much. So it's really important that we document things like that. And then also sports is something that's missing from a lot of physical archives. So that's something we collect a lot on. We've got 3 really big sports collections looking at just individual sports, and then also big international events as well. So we try to collect a wide variety of things that represent different diverse communities in the UK as well. So it's a lot more than we have, because it's digital, and we do have that mandate to preserve everything, and we can fill some of those gaps that are in physical archives.
Yeah, exactly, right. I remember when we did our COVID-19 web archive, and it was just like that, because we did a satire sub collection, because why not, right? There's a side to the pandemic that was a little lighthearted. I don't know if anybody remembers our Prime Minister in the Speaking Moistly incident, where he was describing wearing a mask and how you speak moistly into the mask, and then he corrected himself and had a good laugh, and it went around the internet and became, you know, a joke video on 10 different sites, and we captured them all just because the official record that will be created about the pandemic is going to be, you know, serious and policies. And it's like, but we had some laughs, and the web archive is a place where we could try to capture a bit of that.
Yeah, definitely. We had the same as well. And then there was also a lot of projects, you know, people bringing people together online and recording different experiences. So one of them was a website we collected was about the stories of lockdown. So it was children who wrote stories about their experience of lockdown, which is something that you wouldn't get in the official archive.
No, exactly. Exactly.
But likewise, at the moment, you know, what is happening in the UK with the passing of the Queen is such an important, whatever is our belief and our stance on the royalty and the royal family and monarchy, I think it is an important moment to document. And I was just wondering, Elena, because you're saying, you know, you keep everything. So there are the official news, there is the official websites, there are the news like the Guardian, the BBC, the broadcast, you know, the broad newspapers. But what about the, you know, the part that is represented that comes from other less official, but as important as well, or even some more light-hearted side of things. Obviously, we want to respect the moment, but there is lots of comic things going around it. Not necessary to be with the Queen, but with certain things that is happening around the country, and those things, you know, it's important to also to keep documentation, I think.
Yeah, so we have quite a few royal collections. So we have like the Queen's birthday from a couple of years ago, and then the Jubilee this year, and then with the passing of Prince Philip last year, and then we've got a collection on the Queen's passing as well. But all those collections are really balanced, so they have representation of, you know, what would be considered pro-monarchy and then anti-monarchy, or just in between as well. So we do get they're not just all one narrative, so there's a balance because it represents the UK, so it's that experience. So we are collecting a balanced view, but unfortunately some of the more light-hearted stuff is on social media and memes and stuff, and that's very challenging to archive.
Yes.
So if it's on a blog and it's published within the UK, we would love to hear, you know, send it in, put it, because we have a Save a UK website form on our website. You know, we'd love to archive it, but so that's also a challenge as well when it comes to selecting. Is just what can we identify and what can we archive are two different things, because the challenges of social media. We were able to archive Twitter relatively successfully until recently Twitter changed the way they publish. They now want you to log in to view the content. So you'll only see the page for a split second before they make you log in. And so that means then that blocks it on the archive because we're a robot. So we can't log into the account. So that's also a big issue, but we will hopefully be able to capture some of that maybe through web recorder if we have time, which is also a big issue. So there are some additional things, but because we're archiving at such a large scale, we don't have time or resources to be able to do high fidelity captures a lot of the time because of just capacity issues within the team. And there's a lot going on everywhere. So we've got a lot of collections that we're working on all the time. But we are collecting what's going on at the moment and getting a balanced representation of that.
Helena, just as a question, because it's one thing I did wonder, did you have a plan for that you rolled into place when the Queen died, or was it suddenly ad hoc?
It's ad hoc because we're used to, so we collect on 3 different types of collections. So we've got thematic where somebody comes up and say they want to collect on a certain subject, or we have time-based collections where we know that, like, let's say general elections supposed to be scheduled every 5 years, or the Olympics are coming around at this date and they're going to be hosted within a region. We haven't had the Olympics for a while, but we had the Commonwealth Games recently and the Women's Euros. So we can plan for those ones. But then public figures dying like the Queen, even though I know there's been a lot of preparations for this in other government bodies for a number of years now, it's not something we plan for because we're used to doing rapid responsive collections. So when public figures die or if there's a disaster somewhere, we do rapidly respond to these subjects. And so we have a general, because we've done them before, we have a kind of a general policy for what we do, and then we just have a meeting and discuss what the scope of that collection will be, and then a quick document would be done, like just a brief description, so that everybody knows what we're collecting for and what the scope of that collecting is. So yeah, there wasn't anything planned, but it will be coming.
Because it did occur to me to wonder, because was it London Bridge or something like that was the name of the formal plan, and I was thinking, well, I wonder if the libraries actually had a plan that said, "Oh, the Queen's dead, roll it out."
Yeah, no, it was definitely a rapid response reaction from us. Because we're used to these things, so we're used to responding to current events. And same with the pandemic as well. That was a rapid response collection, and then it becomes a bit more because it's more of a longer term thing that we're living with now. It becomes a bit more refined than the scope of what the collection is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the conversation. Really thank you for letting me come in and having a chat. Ask as many questions that I wanted. It's rare that we can do that in a conference.
Thank you for getting the conversation going. So nice.
Yeah, it was really great. Thanks, Fabiana.
I believe the conversation after the actual poster has been more interesting.
Yesterday I presented a lightning talk, and I was saying to a colleague, it's sometimes we do posters and lightning talks because it's a good exercise for us as well to sharpen what we want to say. But is in a conference, it might not spark the discussion afterwards, and it's awkward for the speaker because you feel like nobody has questions. But in my experience, sometimes people come back afterwards with an email saying, "I've heard about your," so sometimes it takes a little bit of time in a different place. But these have being able to actually talk with the presenters has been quite a very, very good, especially attending this conference online. Theo, I know you are in the conference, but for us online has been quite, if you like, missing out on talking to people and meeting new people. So Angela and Elena and Theo, thank you so much for allowing me to be part of to network. And I really thank you, everyone. And thank you, everyone, I think, for listening to me as well.
Thank you for listening and just starting this interesting conversation. All of
Yeah, we did
all of
so
us.
much for that.
All right. So
I
we
think
are
we better go.
Thanks, Ian.
close. We are close to the time.
Yeah, and Uri as well. Uri, I like the cats theme, and I know that's come across in some other presentations as well. The cats have been a big thing at this conference. It's also in the DPC toolkit for skills and training.
That's right. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.